Hello, everyone. We'll give everyone just a moment to log on and to get situated. Welcome to 2023 DEIB Trends and Predictions. Give us just a moment and we will get started. It is officially 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 Central. We'll give it just one more moment to allow everyone to log on. Okay. Welcome, everyone. I am Dawn Christian. I am the Executive Vice President of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, as we'll refer to it today, DEIB, at Canaries. I am joined today with Jared Fitzpatrick from Signify Health and Demetrius Cunningham from Extreme Networks. Today's discussion will be all about what's to come in 2023. We will be talking about 2023 DEIB trends and predictions. As we've stated today, what that means for your organization and how to stay ahead. Hi, Demetrius. Hi, Jared.
Hi, Dawn.
Hey, Dawn.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for being here with us. This webinar is truly a discussion. It's a fireside chat, and we're going to be discussing end of year predictions for 2023, as stated earlier. We want to talk about some of the issues that we're rounding out the year with from 2022, but also we want to talk about what this means as we enter 2023 and continue to build sustainable DEIB programs, policies, and practices within our organizations. So first, I want to go ahead and introduce myself. My eyes are watering. My name is Dawn Christian, and I'm thrilled to be a part of our fireside chat today. A little bit about me. I am, yes, the EVP of DEIB at Canaries. But in that job, I lead what is known as the act of belonging. What does that mean for organizations? What does it mean to create a sense of belonging? And I work as a lead coach and partner with other organizations, like with Demetrius and like with Jared, to really understand how to enact inclusive and diverse initiatives by counseling our clients on diversity, equity, let's be clear, equity, not equality, inclusion, and belonging. And as we like to say here, equity is the rigorous practice in pursuit of equality. And we'll get into that a bit in our conversation today. We partner with our clients to build strategies and best practices that are informed by data. We are a data organization here at Canaries. Additionally, I am often found participating on speaking events like this, podcasts, and I'm an ideas advisor to boards, national boards, both nonprofit and profit boards. So let's find out a little bit more about who I'm with today. First up, Jared, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Dawn, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to be here. So Jared Fitzpatrick, I serve as the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion for Signify Health. which is a healthcare technology company that primarily focuses on serving Medicare Advantage patients, so seniors, through in-home health evaluations and partnering with hospitals, clinics to ensure that there's a continuum of care for our seniors. I have the pleasure of also getting to work with some other consultancy and speaking things on the side. And I always love when I get to come and work with the Canaries team because you all do amazing work. Just a little bit more about me on a personal note. I have been in DEI for about 8 years. Before that, I was in management consulting and worked with some really great clients in the healthcare and higher education space. I live in Dallas, so I'm based here, and married to my beautiful wife, Brooke, and love to travel. And so have at this point traveled to 35 countries, soon to be 36, and all 50 states. So love to experience other cultures. Outside of that, I will just say that, DEI is my passion, but also my purpose. And so whether it's with Signify or consulting, I love to do this work, and I will continue doing this work probably for the rest of my life. So so thank you again for being here. I'll turn it back over to you.
Jared, thank you so much for adding the personal and human touches to who we are, because that is the center of why I think each of us do this work. Demetrius, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Demetrius Cunningham, and I just wanted to say thank you for having me. I am the Senior Director of DEI Initiatives and Strategic Partnerships at Extreme Networks. Extreme Networks is a cloud-based networking company end-to-end that provides solutions, right? So I've spent over 2 decades in the technology sector with roles spanning from sales leadership, business development, operations, chief of staff, and even had an opportunity to do a short-term expat assignment in India. And I will tell you, that was a life-changing experience for me. I've also had the opportunity to work with a Fortune 50 company as well as a unicorn startup. And now I'm at a mid-sized company. So there's diversity in terms of employment as well. As Jared mentioned, it's about the people for me. I love connecting with people and really trying to understand their perspective on things. And so this is also the ideal spot for me in terms of doing this work in DEI. And I will say that I'm excited because the timing of this for Extreme Networks and also for myself, Extreme Networks was just named as one of the best places to work in 2023 or 2022. So just excited about that. And, hopefully we'll have a great conversation today. Thank you.
Congratulations. And we love to see that DEIB work that we've been doing, that we strive to do, that we're all very passionate about, coming into fruition with recognition like that. So appreciate you sharing that and parts of who you are as well. I think we have a lot of common threads. The global lens, having been in different industries. I spent 23 years in the biotech pharma space. I've also been in nonprofit ops. So I think when we think of the term diversity, which means different, we take all of those different experiences and bring them to the table, not only in the sense of our own lived experiences, which are very valuable, but also in the sense of perspective. And so I think we can dig in a bit here today in bringing all of who we are and what brought us here to the table. And so our first question, and I think it's top of mind for a lot of us, especially as we're closing out the year, is about mental health and wellness in the workplace. The true threat on employee mental health and wellness continues to intensify. 60% of the global workforce has reported at least one mental health challenge. Burnout has been established by the CDC as a mental health issue, burnout. as a health issue, not only mental health, but a health issue. And let's be very clear for everyone that's on the webinar today that when we say mental health and wellness, we're not speaking only of, of mental health in the sense of having any type of kind of reaction to an incident, but also to long-term exposure to feeling tired, burnout, stress. So we're speaking of the whole body of wellness when we say mental health and wellness. Company and HR leaders need to find solutions. In 2023, mental health and well-being will continue to be a central focus. And a Gallup survey found that 2 out of 3 US employees say they plan to make employee mental health and emotional well-being, so both mental health and emotional well-being programs and solutions, part of their workforce strategy and programs over the next 3 years. So my question, and I'll tip this one over to you first, Jared, is as we look into next year, what are some improvements regarding mental health in the workplace that should be a focus? How can we do not only more, maybe it's not more, maybe it's just be more intentional. Maybe it's being more focused.
Yeah. So this is a great topic. And I think a lot of companies are still trying to figure out how to support their employees, and for team leaders, how to support their teams. This concept of burnout really came to a head this year in 2022. And this idea of quiet quitting, where people are still coming into work and are still getting their work done, but are just not giving that additional effort anymore, I think has become kind of the theme of this year. Is people are tired and they are not giving that additional effort, right? So what I've seen companies do, and then I'll share what we're doing, is really providing additional support services. Sometimes that's through their employee assistance program, or EAP. Sometimes it's through supplementary apps. I know Calm is one of the apps that I've seen a lot of companies use for meditation. Headspace is another one. We even tried out a wellness app called Journey, and it would have different workouts that you could do for our employees. But so just taking it back to Signify and what we're working on, we have a group that focuses on health and wellness. It's not an ERG. We actually have a group called Spirit of Signify, and it's kind of our culture committee. And one of the areas within that group is the group that focuses on health and wellness. And so they host webinars, fun activities for all of our employees, and they talk about different aspects of taking care of yourself, especially in a remote setting where you may be isolated, like what that can do to your psyche, and kind of that feeling of being isolated can sometimes have a toll. And people sometimes experience depression and other very real symptoms. And so they've done a great job of hosting those webinars. And then we also purchased a license for all of our employees to Udemy, which is a learning management platform, and there's tons of great courses. And so we put together some learning paths for our hiring managers on how to support their teams who may be dealing with burnout and mental health issues. And we've seen a lot of utilization on those, especially heading into the holidays, where there's sometimes mental health concerns with people who don't have a family to go to, and all they're hearing about is, I'm going to go spend time with my family. And so that we see that being a really high time when we need to support our employees. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing, what we're doing. And then going into 2023, what I really think is just going to be an increased focus on mental health. And I hope that companies will continue to invest in resources, counseling resources, especially for their employees.
Jared, thank you for kicking us off there. We did get some interaction in the chat, so I would like to kind of dig into this question a little bit. And Before I do that though, I do want to call out a couple of things that you've mentioned,
Yeah.
which is this trend of quiet quitting. I think we know what that means, but could you give us a little bit on what is quiet quitting?
I used to hear it referred to as like phoning it in, or sometimes people would say like retired in place if they were further along in their career. This whole concept is not new. It's just a new term for it. But what we saw initially in 2020 and kind of throughout the pandemic was people actually quitting their jobs in droves, with a primarily focus on women. And McKinsey's Women in the Workplace study talked about how many women were leaving the workforce. But in 2022, people weren't physically leaving their jobs, right? They were just mentally kind of leaving their jobs. And so, and I'll be really transparent, I experienced some of that myself, and I saw people on my team experiencing it, where it's just so much going on that caused burnout and kind of this mental tiredness that you really had to take a break and take a step back. And so what we tried to focus on was encouraging people to take that mental break, right? And if they needed to take some time, we have an unlimited PTO policy. So if you need to take some time during the week, take a day, take a couple days if you need to, and then come back when you're recharged and refreshed, because we would much rather people do that than to be unproductive or to actually quit. Right.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think it leads us nicely to Sienna Little. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly, Sienna, question in the chat, which is, in terms of setting up employees for success when it comes to burnout and mental health and wellness, what methods of implementing building resilience in people programs do you recommend? And if it's okay, Demetrius, can I give that one to you?
Yes. Again, it's about making sure that we have, and that was one of the points, make sure that we have parity in mental health programs globally. And then if you also look at it, bringing in our ERGs. There are different experiences that we have, different demographics, right? Veterans may have a different level of mental health or mental wellness that needs to be addressed versus someone in the LGBTQ plus community, right? So we need to make sure that our programs are also aligned with the various regions as well as the ERGs. I think that's a huge benefit. And then I was going to say, you mentioned this earlier, Dawn, when we say mental health, we're looking at the holistic program. So we have to think of things like mental wellness, financial wellness. What type of program do you have for stress management or, mindfulness and meditation, right? So what things can you implement that will help? And I will say that our Extreme Wellness program has done a tremendous job of aligning with our ERGs and bringing in that type of programming that reaches the masses. So hopefully that answered part of the question. And then I would say too, one thing that we've done is we've implemented a global EAP program. So you have to make sure, again, that you have consistency. We tend to have that lens of just the US, but I want to make sure to broaden it, to from a global perspective. And then I would say, why does, kind of take a step back. Wellness begins in the mind, right? So we need employees to be in the right headspace to be productive. Because if you are not engaged psychologically, if you don't have psychological meaningfulness, availability, or safety, you're not able to be productive at work. So that's the last thing that I would add. Thank you.
That part, the whole health. And one thing that was a common thread in the responses was this sense of community, connectedness. Right? Whether you're using ERGs, employee resource groups, whether you're tapping into resources like employee assistance programs, which do, in addition to having counseling services, also have elements of financial wealth coaching, also have wealth of caretaker needs. And I did say caretaker, not just parents, but caretaker needs. They do have guidance in terms of just managing your day. They can actually talk to you about how do you set up your day, right? So when we're tapping into resources, ask all the questions, right? And most importantly, be intentional as a practitioner to think about how the different folks show up, whether that's a global lens, right? What does it mean to have EAP services in India versus in Indiana, right? USA. What does it mean if you have a more mature workforce, or if you have a multilingual workforce, do we have to speak to our EAP services about having those languages available? What's needed, right? To really make sure that a resource is a resource. I see plenty of questions in the chat to continue this conversation on mental health and wellness, but I do want to get us to some of the other trends. I have not forgotten any of you. We will come back to those. I do see you, Sherilyn. I do see you, Dupree, Haley Dupree, and I think there's one other that might be in there. I see you. We'll come back to this conversation because I think some of where we're going may actually answer some of this. One of the other big trends that has started in 2022, but it continues to be a conversation for 2023 and probably beyond here, is pay transparency. The conversation around pay transparency is a real one. And in different organizations and different locations, because we've seen some laws come into effect, right? In New York and in California. Let's just kind of have a perspective. And I'll start with you, Demetrius, on pay transparency. And the question would be, what information or data is needed in order to move the needle on pay equity? Here at Canaries, we do information, we do data. So what information, what data can we leverage to really drive equitable pay?
I will say, first of all, let's just acknowledge the elephant in the room. When we talk about pay transparency, a lot of corporations, it's taboo almost. It's like, hey, are we really going to open this Pandora's box, if you will? But this is something that is happening in other parts of the world, right? But to answer your question, so I would say companies need to make sure that their compensation structure is ready for prime time, right? If you are looking at job leveling, make sure that we understand how the work gets done, understand the job scope and discipline, the type of work that needs to get done, and then also understanding the competitive market data. Are you align with where the market is right now? Are you paying lower than the market rate or higher? And that leads to attracting and retaining your employee base as well. So those are things that I think could certainly help. And I'll say this. So, we talked about the data that's needed. If you look at some of the challenges that we have, it's about providing the right level of tools and resources to help, because it's a lot of heavy lifting. It's a lot of manual work. So are there tools and resources out there to help with automation and, just to bring that data forward? So, those are a couple of things that I would mention, recommend. And then also, Dawn, if I could, some of these laws, as you mentioned, they're taking effect in 2023. Let's make sure that we all acknowledge that we may not be ready for prime time, but I think it is important, and all of us have been through this, that we have a plan and that we are communicating. It is part of change management, right? You may not have all of the pieces in place today, but make sure that we are communicating to our key stakeholders internally and to our employees where we are headed. And I think this helps, just overall, just understanding where we're going as an organization. And then you have to make sure that, as I mentioned, that you understand your data. if you don't know what's happening inside of your house, you know, that it could be problematic for you. And then finally, I would say make sure that you prepare your managers. They may not have all of the answers, but at least prepare them with some of the answers and give them tools and resources in order to direct their employees. Thank you.
I appreciate the completeness of not only the data that is needed to really do this rigorous work of equity, because you know that takes a lot of information and specific information over intervals of time. So when we're doing the true work of equity, we are being complete and rigorous in the information that we need. And some of that information is intersectional, right? It may be time on the job. It may be race and ethnicity. It may be gender identity, all coming together to build, you know, what I show up as, right? I'm not just one thing. I am a Black female that's been in corporate America for 25 plus years, right? That's how I show up on some, you know, list of identities and identity markers. And so I think, you know, when we think about pay equity, we have to also think about how those intersect, right? All of the factors to really be intentional about that. I also appreciate how you closed out, which is this sentiment of let them see us grow, be transparent, talk about what we know and what we don't know, give us some guidance as to what we're actually thinking of as an organization. What are the considerations? Because that transparency leads us to another term that was referenced earlier today, which is psychological safety. I feel more trust and psychological safety when there's this sense of transparency versus silence. So that communication, but having something to communicate, having the data, having the insights, having the analysis to be able to articulate that journey is part of that process as well. So I'm going to keep us going because we're getting into the meat of some things. And I do see the chat. I'm going to check the chat really quick. Oh, yes. Jared, before I push off, I want to make sure that I get a reflection from you in terms of, you know, anything that Demetrius has already touched on, but also your lens on maybe the need for information, the way it's communicated, the challenges. What are some of the challenges that you've seen?
I first just want to say I echo what Demetrius says, co-sign all of that. Yes, you need to have your pay structure set up before you just start putting ranges on job descriptions, which is actually the biggest challenge I've seen, is that companies are worried about how their current employees will react when they start seeing these pay ranges on job descriptions, because they may not know what their pay range is or what their peers' pay range is. But just going back to the piece on, you know, having a global mindset, we have offices across the U.S., but also internationally. So when the New York law went into effect, we of course had to respond to that. California is going to effect in 2023, but Ireland, which we have an office in Ireland, also requires you to report on the pay disparity, gender pay disparity, I should say. And so we had to start complying with that, right? And so what I would say here is, if you're pausing or waiting and hoping that like you can wait this thing out, you can't. Get started now, because it will become a requirement for companies. So yes, look at the compliance and legal requirements to see if you have to do it, because not everybody does. But I would go ahead and start putting the pieces in place today.
Yep. I appreciate that so much, because yes, while there are things already being established in New York and California and Ireland, it just gives us a head nod that this is coming, right? And to be fair, this is something that, you know, we want to know, right? You want to know. You're in a job, you want to know, how am I, you know, kind of compensated? If somebody else has the same level, has been around the same time, what does merit really look like? What is compensation completely, right? And so I think if we put the human back in the question, right, put yourself back in the seat, I think it makes it a little bit less of kind of a rub to understand the why behind these questions. I am going to get us to our next question, which Jared, I'm actually going to ask you to lead on this because you mentioned a benefit that you all are leveraging for mental health and wellness that I think ties nicely to this third question. So I'll have you expound on here in addition to that. But upskilling will be a key recession proof, and I would maybe even say quiet quitting proof business, right? Upskilling your employees. And so, when we think about all of the signs, right? If folks are still working remotely, looking at all the options for ways to work, with all the signs pointing to global economic turndown, companies have already started announcing hiring shutdowns, right? Freezes, layoffs. We've seen it all across tech. And according to a study, employees value the ability to learn skills on the job, right? Folks, you get in there and there's this whole list of competencies you're said to have when you're in the job. And then you get there and you realize what is truly valued and recognized within the organization, whether it's a skill, a way of doing things, so that on-the-job learning is, really something that's valued. The study said 83% of workers place their value on being upskilled in the next year. They want that focus for the next year. In that same study, 74% of employees were willing to leave their current job. Willing to leave, 74% willing to leave their current job due to a lack of skill building in their job and career mobility. So with those facts, with that data, with the impending recession, how can companies upskill their employees? Not only how can they upskill them, but maybe give us a little bit of and why it matters.
Yeah. So that stat that you shared does not shock me at all. I'll share what we're doing, and then I'll share what I've seen some other people do that I think is really cool. So we, as I mentioned earlier, did implement Udemy this year, and we gave everybody access, no matter what their job role was. And the whole purpose of that was for them to take the courses that they want to take or are interested in, even if it doesn't relate to their job position. We did create learning paths to help people navigate because there's thousands and thousands of courses, but we saw a lot of people that were taking courses in IT, specific like technical components of IT, software engineering, development, network administration, that were not in IT. And that was really interesting for us because even they could kind of see the writing on the wall that a lot of our roles that we're hiring for are in those technical positions. I'll be really transparent here. We did have to do a reduction in force earlier this year. And that was a big component of how we determined how we were going to try to keep as many people as we could. It was the ones who had expanded their skill sets outside of that core role that when we shut down that portion of the business, we didn't need anymore. So those who had started taking some of those courses and had looked for opportunities to engage with outside of their department or team were able to transfer more easily. And once we saw that, we actually implemented a new program. We'd started a sponsorship program already, but we started a networking program. And the whole point of this was to get people outside of their team and engage with leaders, hiring leaders in other departments across the company. And so far, it's been very successful. We piloted it for about 3 months at this point. We've gotten a lot of really good feedback. But to your question about why is upskilling so important, what I've seen some other companies doing is actual job shadowing programs that I'd love to see us do, but I think is something that's very helpful for employees in a particular area to really understand what another area does. So one, that just helps them to be a better collaborative team member. But two, it gives them the idea that I can go do this, right? It's not this black box of I have no idea what's going on there. So I've seen some companies do job shadowing, and it's yielded productivity benefits for them, which I think is a big one. But to your point about the recession, which some would argue we're already in, there's going to be more layoffs. This is just my prediction. But
we're in a prediction conversation.
Right. But I think there's going to be more layoffs. There's going to be companies prioritizing certain roles over others, and so I think anyone who is able to take advantage of learning management. We also have tuition reimbursement, as many companies do. Take advantage of those tuition reimbursement resources. Like, do it now. We talk a lot about with our employees growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, and this idea that you can do more if you desire to. So we push and encourage people to expand beyond their core job responsibilities. So I'll pause there.
It was a robust response, but I love it. And I'll pull some threads here, which are the formal and the informal upskilling, right? The programmatic ways of saying, take this course, expose yourself to this core skill, get this cross-functional. Cross-functional is another keyword that I will pull out of there. But I also will pull out the informal upskilling, which is the sponsorship element. And with that, Demetrius, I would love to kind of hear how you all might be leveraging upskilling, but what does that do for a sponsorship, whether it's formal or informal relationship, to see someone actively trying to acquire more skill, more appetite to do something else, a cross-functional lens on something. And when I want to also balance the fact that we started out this conversation talking about mental health and wellness, right? And balance and burnout. So when we're saying more, we're saying the appetite for more to grow, to kind of be able to focus on something else. So I want to balance what we mean when we say more. We don't mean more tasks. We mean more investment.
That's right. That's right. So thank you for that question. And I will say this directly aligns with one of our core values at Extreme, and that is curiosity. So the organization has to foster a culture of learning. So if you're not curious and, yes, I'm not trying to do your job, but maybe as Jared mentioned, I want to understand a little bit more, I want to job shadow. That is important in an organization. We have a mentorship program that's doing very well right now. And, a lot of our ERG members are active in the mentorship program, but even outside of that, I think that's a key component because it gives you exposure to other roles and within the organization. Also, you mentioned Udemy earlier, Jared. We actually took a slightly different turn. And when I talk about making sure that learning is a part of the culture, we are partnered with LinkedIn Learning. And what we have challenged each one of our employees is to have at least 24 hours of learning this fiscal year for us. And so that is tracked, it's reported, and it's encouraged, right? And so to your point, you want to reward a growth mindset. So when you start to see folks getting promoted, it's because they have multiple skills. But what this does for an organization, and I think you touched upon it as well, it creates not only for the organization, but for the employee, organizational agility, right? So I could go to operations tomorrow because I've had that background, or I can go to a sales role because I've had that background as well. But this is something that I think companies are really focusing on. And it also helps to increase employee productivity overall. So we're not asking you to do more, we're asking you to be curious and to understand more of the roles within the organization. and to help upskill yourself. And I'll say this, if I could, it's tricky for some companies because you are constantly driving towards revenue and productivity. And how do you really take that step back to give your employees the time and space to learn? Mm-hmm. Are you afraid that you're going to lose productivity? That's not the case. If you step back and you look at it long-term, there are long-term benefits. Your productivity is going to increase. So just wanted to end with that point. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you. And I'm actually going to throw y'all, is it okay? I think I can throw y'all a little bit of a curveball that attaches to this question. When it comes to upskilling, when it comes to having sponsorship in the workplace, we're all DEIB practitioners. So I'm going to tie in a little bit of what does it mean when you look at the identities across organizations to be able to have the opportunity to upskill, to have some exposure. Could it mean something different for different identities within your organization, especially when we consider being recession-proof or retaining employees? What difference could it make across identities to invest in making the time, space, and having the culture of learning within your organization?
I've seen, not necessarily within Extreme, but in a past life, so we're talking about past experiences as well, where there have been programs where executives are reaching out to a diverse slate of candidates who may not look like them, and it's intentional, right? So it's in some circles, it's called reverse mentorship, or, you have that sponsorship as well. There's a difference between mentorship and sponsoring. But I think it's important.
Before you push on that, I think it's important to pull that thread for what sponsorship means and what mentorship means, because I think they get conflated and there's an intentionality in those.
So when you have a seat at the table as EVP, Dawn, you have someone within the organization that you are sponsoring, and you're an advocate for that person behind closed doors. Mentoring, you're helping to coach and upskill a particular individual. Some of that happens within a sponsorship, but sponsorship is, hey, you're putting your badge on the line for this person and you're bringing them along in the process.
Right.
Jared, was there anything else that I missed on that, or?
No, you hit it. That was it.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you for letting me pull that thread. I'm sorry to pull you off a little bit off track, but I wanted to make sure that we were complete in understanding what we mean when we say mentorship and sponsorship.
Absolutely.
You were saying a bit more, though, in terms of identity and upskilling, adjacent to having a mentorship or a sponsorship relationship.
Yeah, I think it's important that, your executive sponsors or your EL, your executive team, they're also reaching back and sponsoring someone who may not look like them, but also, bringing them forward, because if it's visible, and you see this person, being promoted within the organization, sponsorships are not always talked about either. That's the other thing, right? So it's kind of quiet, but that person is sponsoring someone, a diverse member of the organization. So.
I just had a quick story I wanted to share about this. When you talked about executive sponsors, Demetrius, I was like, I was so glad you said that. So with our ERGs, we talk about education and learning experiences, and we do a lot of events. But when the story that sticks out in my mind is one of our executive sponsors of our Black ERG, just to go back a second, we were recently acquired by CVS Health. And so big change, right? Everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. People are really trying to figure out what's happening with their job, more importantly. And the executive sponsor of our Black ERG came to the Black ERG and said, hey, I want to tell you all what's going on from my perspective as our general counsel on the executive leadership team, right? And so he wasn't giving them specific skills, but he was giving them context and knowledge that was helpful for them as they were making decisions around what they wanted to do with their careers or things that they wanted to go out and learn. And so he had an hour-long session where he just walked through the details of the process. A lot of the people on that call had not been through an acquisition before. He was explaining the different processes of an acquisition, what they could expect. Hugely helpful. I mean, that was one of those examples I was like, I wish every single one of our sponsors would do that, would take a concept that's big and meaty and maybe hard to understand for the average person and just really break it down for that group, especially a group that may be sometimes marginalized and isn't getting that direct line of information. So that was, I loved that.
And I'll try to put a stamp on just that, Jarrett, and just say that representation matters. I'll leave it at that.
Part. That part. That part. So when we hear the term marginalized, when we hear representation, when we hear things like look like you, let's think about look like you, live like you. Maybe not. Maybe they do. Maybe they've been here as long as you have. Maybe they haven't, right? To truly value a sense of inclusion and diversity, we must be able to value all that humans represent, right? And it matters, right? And one thing I will say about sponsorship and the relationship with sponsorship is that a sponsor is so committed to the purpose and to the goal that regardless of whether or not the representation is or is not in the room, regardless of who that representative body is, the focus is on moving the needle, striving for equity in the pursuit of equality. So if you're truly sponsoring, you are in this thing. And when your resources, whether that is your time, your money, or both, or your influence, is really what that relationship is about. And yes, representation matters. So I'm going to get into the representation of the generational representation within organizations, and hopefully we'll get to both of these two questions because I think there is a relationship. But we're talking, I wanted to get into this idea of the expanding role of a caregiver. And when we think about who a caregiver is, I want to be explicit that we're not only speaking of the traditional, whatever traditional means, right? Because we hear that term. So parental relationships, we're not only speaking about parents, those with kids, and even minor kids, right? You might have adult kids at home. We're speaking of caregiving in all of its senses, adoptive kids. We're talking about, yes, you had a child or children. Yes, you might have elder care and multi-generational home. So when we think about that, let's talk about kind of, and I'm going to give us some data to reflect on and then go to the question. There's a recent survey that finds that workers with caregiving responsibilities are the fastest growing category in employee identity groups, with 12% of companies tracking them as such. The pandemic really opened up a range of caregiver responsibilities, such as caring for aging parents, sick kids, or family members with disabilities. And companies will need to find ways to really support our employees, our workforce, with knowing that this is a growing trend. How does the growing number of employees who identify as caregivers impact the overall workforce? And I will go to Demetrius on this one.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll just say right away that it highlights the need for what we discussed earlier, an increased investment in wellness programs, because caregiving, and I forgot to mention this part from a personal standpoint. So I have a 21-year-old son, junior in college, and I also have my dad, who I look after with my sisters. I mean, he's not in my home, but that's also a part of caregiving. So I'm also able to speak to this from a personal standpoint. The reason why I mentioned both of those is because I'm also what they call the sandwich generation, where not only are you caring for an aging parent. You're also looking after your 21-year-old son who you can't tell anything, right? But anyway, we won't go there. So,
We will. I can relate.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But I will say that, also tying back the point of providing the tools and resources, to that growing generation. Our ERG that's focused on Hispanics and Latinx co-sponsored with our Extreme Wellness Group, a 4-part series that was focused on the sandwich generation, whether it was just overall care, the top 25 documents that you needed to have in place, just various aspects, and just making sure that support was there. So, very proud of the team for partnering and really providing that resource, to our employees. And I will mention, just because our group La Raza sponsored it, it was open to all Extreme employees. I'll also say that, the rise of the caregivers will force companies to reimagine work. There's an idea right now. We talked about job shadowing. How about job sharing? Are there roles that could be part-time and you have 2 people performing that same job? Again, that's, maybe a little far-fetched for some companies, but, this is something that could come into play where someone's just content working 20 hours a week. They may be in a situation where they can sustain that. So that's something else that I would say that will influence, the workforce.
Thank you so much for that. And also for leaning into work week flexibility, right? Because I think we touched on that just a tad. So I don't want to let that nugget be out there and not address the fact that some of both the mental health and wellness factor, the upskilling, the balance factor and the caregiver factor that we've all talked about could also be addressed in addressing how the work week and the work day flexes. I'm going to put a pin in that because we're still having this generational conversation. If we can, we'll come back to the work day and work week, especially since a lot of us are looking at returning to office and what that looks like. But Jared, I want to talk about Gen Z and its influence on the workplace. Gen Z is already joining the workplace in droves. Many of them are entering as early as their 20s, ready for full-time employment. Data shows, right, got to go to the data, that by 2025, Gen Z workers will make up 27% of the workforce. Soon, they will yield immense economic power and their culture of influencing change, right? Think of how they've grown up, what they've seen, right? Gen Z voices will not go unnoticed in the workplace. I think, we know that, right? Their social media is part of who they are, living out loud. This is part of just their experience. It will be important for companies to figure out how to keep this demographic group as they provide, or as they're proving they have no problem leaving their companies. These are also young folks that are like, work, start a business, both, right? But this is who we're working with, which is fantastic in terms of the inspiration to do and be a part of, society. But nearly 65% of Gen Z workers plan to leave their jobs in less than a year, compared to 40% of all employees. 65%. What does this mean? What is this growth of Gen Zers showing up? What does it mean? What changes?
Ooh. Oh, man. If I could answer that question, I would be like a millionaire right now. If I could answer that, all of that. But first, I think it's important to quantify what we're talking about. So when we say Gen Z, we're talking about people born after 1997 through, I think, 2012. So like 25 years old is kind of the cap of the Gen Z group. So you got to think about what's happened over the last few years. It's been COVID. Some of these people just got out of college, right? Or were doing college virtually, right? And so social isolation is a big thing that we've been seeing. And what I mean by that is sometimes the social skills aren't as developed as we would expect for people coming into a workplace. And I hate to generalize a whole group, but when we're seeing younger people coming in, they're really prioritizing flexibility, the ability to work remotely. And as we're seeing more and more people try to push back into the office, we're seeing an equal amount of people like butting against that and saying, no, I want to stay at home, or I want to stay remote. I know some people who are like traveling the world, but as long as they have their laptop with them, they're good. And they don't want that to end. So we're having to really rethink, what does it look like for us to have a productive workforce? Does that mean they have to be physically located near the office? The other thing that we're seeing is a lot of the people from this generation are more interested in the social impact, right? Like, what is the company's commitment or contribution to environmental, social, and governance efforts, right? ESG is the thing that everybody's kind of focused on right now, and DEI fits into that S component, the social component. And so we're being a lot more intentional about marketing what we're doing and talking about it openly, externally, but also within our employee groups, of really highlighting the work that we're doing in DE&I and with our ESG function. So I think to answer your question, hopefully, the biggest change will just be more intentionality around allowing employees to work in a way that's most productive for them. And that might be remotely, that might be hybrid or flexible, different work arrangements, meaning like alternative work schedules. Maybe it's not a traditional 5-day work week. Mm-hmm. And also just really prioritizing the social impact work and volunteerism. So that's what we're seeing, at least.
I appreciate that so much. And we do have a follow-up question that I think ties to both Demetrius's response in the flex work arrangements and also your closing comment around flex work arrangements. We had a question in the Q&A that says, aren't you afraid that job sharing will result in more pressure to provide higher compensation?
That is a great question. Again, this goes back to pay transparency, right? So I think that, you communicate upfront what the job entails, responsibilities, and yes, it may require more pressure, in terms of higher salaries or what have you. But, I think it's something that we need to consider. Just an idea, it's not anything that Extreme has in place at this point, but just companies overall. I hear it more in Europe than anywhere else. And I'll just say that, from a flex first standpoint or a hybrid work model, we have that at Extreme. And in fact, our employees absolutely love it. They can come into the office. We have some organizations that have collaboration days where if you're near an office, then you go in maybe once a week, or once a month during a particular day. So, but going back to Gen Z, we have to make sure that we are intentional, make sure that our commitments are visible because they will hold you accountable, and then make sure that we walk the walk with them. So
I appreciate that so much because there's a lightning round with our last 2 minutes that I want to make sure that we get to. And again, for those that are in the Q&A, we will follow up with responses on some of the questions if we don't get to them fully here. But the last question is, there's a DEIB reckoning upon us. There were a lot of statements across the last 2-3 years. There have been a lot of pledges. There have been a lot of commitments since the murder of George Floyd. And so with gross amounts of money being donated or pledged here, statements being made, DEIB officers being put in place. Give me, if you can, in no more than three words with our last minute here, how would you sum up the reckoning? What term, what words would you say are really what we need to be focused on in 2023? What's coming to head?
I would say, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, Jared, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I would just say outcome over action.
Outcome over action.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Demetrius?
Just commitment and visibility. That's
invisibility. I'll add one to the pot. Transparency. Actually, I'll add two. Transparency and accountability.
Yes.
And my third word, I would not be canaries if I didn't say information.
That's right.
I appreciate you both for joining me today. I'm going to honor the time that we could have done this for so much longer. But Demetrius, Jared, your reflections of 2022 and predictions for 2023 were invaluable. And thank you for sharing this time and space with me and with Canaries. We have...
Uh-oh.
And I'll just say, while she's frozen on the screen, if you'd like to reach out, please reach out on LinkedIn, Demetrius Cunningham, and you can find me there. And, Canaries has been a pleasure. And Jared, it's been a pleasure working with you on this.
Same. And yeah, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn if y'all have any questions or just want to connect. Thank you all.
Thank you. I got froze, but thank you.
Okay.
You bet. Thank you all. Bye-bye.